need to introduce myself hopefully again. But I get to continue with our series, Unshakable Faith, as we're in the third week of it. And I want to start by just bringing up a concept maybe you've heard, maybe you're familiar with. You ever heard of the expectation gap before? A nod of heads or, just anything. Anyone heard of it before? All right. I think it's a gap that maybe you've experienced before. If you have heard of it, then you know. If you don't, then I'll just kind of clarify what it is. It's the gap between what your expectations are and what reality is. And it hits in a lot of different areas. Maybe it hits at work, right? You start a new job with these expectations. You start the first day of the job, and those expectations don't match. Then you get years in, and they still don't match, right? It's just the gap. And that gap, it's different in a lot of areas of life, but that expectation gap is there. Now, the thing is, that expectation gap, while it can hit all these different areas of life, it can also hit a faith journey. It can also hit our relationship with God. And that's where the expectation gap is a little bit interesting, because a lot of people experience a gap between what they believe a perfect, loving God would do, but then the experiences of their life, the reality of their life. There's a gap there. And in that gap, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of disappointment, there's a lot of conflict. All these things happen in that gap. And many times, that gap causes us to question God. And maybe these are questions you've heard, you've said, you've heard other people in your life say, or wondered whether God cares, whether he's listening, or whether he even loves us. Maybe you've thought that. The thing about the gap, the expectation gap, is, a lot of people, they give up on God and they walk away from faith. That's what a lot of people do in the gap. And you can call walking away from faith or deconstructing your faith whatever kind of language you want to use for today, right? But I think there is actually another way that people give up on God in the gap. And it doesn't quite look like walking away from faith in the traditional sense, okay? Another way that I think people give up on God is actually through self-confidence, right? They give up on God, but they mask it with self-confidence. Here's what I mean by that. In the gap is suffering, pain, disappointment, frustration, and all this stuff. And they try to, that gap is there, and they try to avoid all that by their own power and strength. It's almost like if God won't remove the suffering, then we are going to work really, really hard to prevent it. And this is the thing about people, right? Don't we? We work really, really hard to avoid being hurt or uncomfortable. We don't like that. The thing about that, though, is many of us experience fear that our efforts to do that won't be enough. There's a fear that we won't be able to avoid the pain, that we won't be able to avoid the discomfort. We're worried we're actually going to lose the comfort in our lives. We're just afraid of that. We're worried about it. We're anxious about that. And I think it's this desire to avoid discomfort in life that is the cause of so much of our anxiety. And when you look at the data about how anxious people in the United States are, oh my goodness, it's clear there's an issue, right? I mean, look at some of this data. Over 30% of U.S. adults experience anxiety disorder at some point in life. That's according to the National Institute of Health. That's their data. I didn't just make this up. When you drop the demographic to a little bit younger, to Gen Z, right, 18 to 24 abouts, you find the number shoots up to 50%. Like, I'm just saying, there is a fear, there's an anxious fear of holding on to what we have or to avoiding discomfort, or there just is. That's why there's a Trappist monk, Thomas Merton, and I came across one of his quotes, and it's stuck in my head ever since, and I want to share it with you. Here's what he said. It says, the more you try to avoid suffering, the more you suffer, because smaller and more insignificant things begin to torture you in proportion to your fear of being hurt. The one who does most to avoid suffering is, in the end, the one who suffers most. Interesting. It's almost like our fear and anxiety of potential suffering can be greater than facing actual suffering. It's like the fear, the anxiety about the discomfort we'll face is greater than what we might actually face. So I bring all that up, and I just kind of underscore that and share that fact, because we've said in this series, Unshakable Faith, we said everybody's faith gets tested at some point, and nobody wants shaky faith, right? If the series was called Shakeable Faith, no one's showing up. Nobody wants that. Who wants a shakeable faith? But I'll say this, the moment that trials, tests, or the potential for suffering show up, our normal reaction is to try and avoid it. And we're anxious, worried, and afraid if we're not able to avoid it. So that puts in my mind kind of like a bigger question to wrestle with. And the bigger question for me, as it occurs to me, is I wonder if there's another way to respond to seasons that are spiritually challenging. And I'm talking spiritually challenging, whether it's trial, whether it's testing, whether it's pain, whether it's suffering, disappointment. You can fill in the blank, but is there another way to respond to seasons that are spiritually challenging other than trying to avoid them? That's the question on the docket. And the prophet Jeremiah, who his writings compile this whole series we've been in, the prophet Jeremiah, who was called by God to deliver a message hundreds of years before Jesus entered the scene. That's where he fits in the story. He describes what that other response, other than avoiding it, looks like. He describes what a response of unshakable faith looks like. And it comes on the heels of where we've already been in this series. So let me kind of tread some ground really quickly to let you know where we were in the first couple weeks, and then we'll look at our text today. Sound good? Sounds good. Okay, good. Here's where we were in the first week. This is what Jeremiah writes. This is what the Lord says. Cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans, who rely on human strength and turn their hearts away from the Lord. So he says cursed, it's a strong word. And then he describes what that cursed looks like. He says those that trust in human strength, he says they are like stunted shrubs in the desert with no hope for the future. They will live in the barren wilderness in an uninhabited salty land. So we talked about you either plant yourself in the Lord or you put your confidence, you plant yourself in human strength. And human strength always creates that stunted shrub. And we use this image. When you look at it, no one's like, refreshing. This is an image of what we don't want to be. And I'm just preparing you. You're going to see this image a lot today, okay? You'll get used to it, okay? If you don't like it, you have to get over that because it's going to be out there a bunch. But it's the image. This is the curse, right? We don't want to be this. And then last week, Pastor Randy added to our understanding of unshakable faith with where Jeremiah goes next. And he says, in contrast to that, blessed are those who trust in the Lord and have made the Lord their hope and confidence. And he talked about the difference between blessing and curse, or blessed and cursed. And in simple terms, and I appreciate this, it says blessed is you'll be glad you did. And cursed is you'll wish you didn't. And that's the distinction. So we talked about last week that blessed are those who are rooted only in the Lord and run their roots in his direction. If you plant yourself in the Lord and run your roots in God's direction, then you will be glad you did. And that's where we landed last week, ultimately with this. Those that trust and put their hope and confidence in the Lord, they are like trees planted along a riverbank with roots that reach deep into the water. Right? We even think about that image of the tree by the river. And that's like, trusting means deep roots. And so you read something like this, it's like there's hope. There's a future. There's a promise. This is good. Like, we don't want to be like that stunted shrub, but we do want that. We want to be like that tree. And it's like like last week ends on such a high note. And the very next passage is where we're going this week. And this is what Jeremiah writes. And he adds to our understanding of unshakable faith with it. And here's what he says. Of these trees, he says, the trees are planted along the riverbank. Such trees are not bothered by the heat or worried by long months of drought, and their leaves stay green. And you look at that like, okay, they're not worried, but that almost sounds like unshakable faith is synonymous with heat and drought. It's like, well, that's not positive. Like, don't if there's a sign-up table for like heat and drought out in the lobby, no one's signing up, right? Sign up for Project Serve, but don't sign up for that, right? And so I've been wondering, I've been thinking about and looking at this and wondering, what's the difference between heat and drought used in this passage? And I think it's the difference. When I think of heat, I think of a hot day. When I think of drought, I think of a lot of hot days. So I think the difference between heat and drought, this is what I think, is that heat is a specific trial, like a moment, right? But drought is a season of suffering, a season of dryness, right? If drought is a specific trial in a moment, then a season of those trials stacked on top of one another, that's drought. And this is the NLT. When I look at this in the ESV, it says something interesting about this. The such trees, they do not fear when heat comes. That's what it says, which is more or less the same, but that when is interesting to me. It's interesting to me because what this seems to be saying is that because you think about who he's talking to. Like Jeremiah's talking to and writing this about people who are planted deep. So what it seems to be saying is no matter the level of your faith, seasons of heat and drought and suffering are just part of the gig. You can't avoid it. That's tough. That's what it seems to be saying. Because it says, when heat comes, as in like it's going to. This is what I think, and this is what I believe. You won't be able to avoid trials or discomfort or those feelings of spiritual dryness, those seasons of it in your life. And no matter how much faith you have, there are those moments in your life where the circumstances of your life are not going to look the way that you want them to look and what you'd pick. And what Jeremiah seems to be revealing in this passage is that the real test for the depth of the roots of a person is how the person responds to those dry seasons. That's what I see. So a person with unshakable faith, let me give you, there's a stunted tree, but I want to give you a different image. You're going to see this image a few times today too. This is what a person with unshakable faith looks like in heat and drought. Here it is. This is it. I look at that, it's like, that looks so barren. But that tree doesn't make sense in that context, right? It's not what you'd anticipate. If I came across that, I'd think I was in a dream. But that's the picture that's being painted by Jeremiah. And it stands in direct contrast to this other shrub that we've been seeing. Boom. Now, I think it's interesting, both the first tree that you saw and this one, they're the same environment. Same seemingly circumstances of heat and drought, but very different appearances and outcomes. So to me, I think the big question is, okay, if I'm looking at what Jeremiah says, and you can't avoid the trial, you can't avoid the heat and drought, those spiritual dryness, those seasons of trial and challenge, if you can't avoid them, the question to me is, how do I respond to a season of drought? How do I respond? And I want to submit to you for your consideration 3 responses. Let me give you those 3 responses. Here's the first one. Expect it's going to happen. Expect it's going to happen. You maybe think like, well, that's what you just said. Expect it's going to happen. Yeah, but I think we have to mentally prepare that it's going to happen. I mean, you're either going through a season of heat and drought, or a season of heat and drought is on its way. Or you've been through it, you're not in it now, but you will be in another one someday. Expect it's going to happen. Expect it's going to happen. Experiencing heat and drought in life, they're a normal part of your life. We all have those experiences of spiritual dryness, and everything that is normal is something that we should expect. And this is why the expectations, I think this is why this is a really important response. If you don't expect it's coming, then when heat and drought do show up, you'll be caught off guard. You'll get sideswiped by it. You won't be ready for it. And then, if you're caught off guard and you're not prepared for it, then ultimately what happens is those moments, you'll turn your back on God because you're putting your confidence in human strength. It's what we all typically default to. This is why you have to be ready and prepared. Right? That's what Jeremiah said. This is what the Lord says. Cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans, who rely on human strength and turn their hearts away from the Lord. It's like whenever you turn your heart, this is the thing, whenever you turn your heart away from God, then you're putting your trust in human strength. And I just mean when those heat and drought, if you're not ready for it, you get caught off guard. You start doing that. And it brings about this curse. It brings about this shrub that we don't want to be. So expect that it's going to happen. Now I've thought about this, like, okay, that's a fair response, but I thought, okay, like how how do I set those correct expectations? And that's so I started thinking about in my life and my journey, how do I respond to seasons of heat and drought? How do I respond to the trials and the challenge? How do I respond to those moments of seasons of dryness in my life? How do I do it? And this is where I just want to share with you things that are encouraging to me and things that have helped me. And this is the biggest thing. To draw my confidence from God, and I invite you to draw your confidence from God, I remind myself of the promises and character of God. That's what I do. I come back to that. I set my expectations on that. And this is one of the things that speaks to me, and let me share it with you. Maybe it'll speak to you. In Hebrews 2, the author writes this of Jesus. Therefore, it was necessary for him, that's Jesus, to be made in every respect like us, his brothers and sisters. In other words, Jesus, who was fully God, became fully man as well. God in the flesh. So that he had to become like us in every respect, so that he could be our merciful and faithful high priest before God. Then he could offer a sacrifice that would take away the sins of the people. And this is the thing, back in the day, the high priest would offer a sacrifice for the whole nation of Israel for their sin. And this is saying that Jesus, who was just like us and knows what it's like to be us, he offered a sacrifice too. It was himself on the cross. There's no more need for sacrifices. There's nothing else that can pay for sin. He's already done it once and for all who have lived, for all who will live. Like, it's for one and all, right? All that choose to trust and believe in him and put their confidence in him. This is the part that really speaks to me, right? Since he himself has gone through suffering and testing, he's able to help us when we are being tested. To me, that is so reassuring, isn't it? You look at Jesus' life. I mean, not only did he die for an innocent man, like he's innocent, completely innocent, but you look at his life, he was treated unfairly. I know what that's like. He knows me. He was treated unfairly. He was lied about. He was rejected by those who were supposed to love him. He knew scarcity. He knew what it was like to not quite have enough resources and not sure how the future, he knew all things, but he had to rely on his Father for the next day. All that to say is, like, he himself, he's gone through suffering. He's been in my shoes. He knows what it's like to be me. And yet, he's able to help me. He promises to help me. To me, this is why this matters. And I don't know if this is just me or if this connects with you. I think in life, I don't know about you. Maybe this is true of humans. Sometimes we're not really sure if someone loves us unless we feel like they really know us. If you're not sure if somebody knows you, how can you be sure they actually love you? And they don't just love the mask you've put on. And so this is why, to me, this really matters, because if he knows what it's like to be me and he loves me still, I believe it. I trust it. And then Jesus, this is what he's written about here. This is what Jesus said the night before he was crucified to his disciples. He says, in this world you will have trouble. So expect it. Expect it's going to happen. But he says, but take heart. I have overcome the world. And he did. And he rose to life on the third day. And I'm just saying, if the one who has overcome the world knows what it's like to be me and promises to help me, then I can trust. He's not going to leave me. He's not going to forsake me, because he knows me. He gets me. And he loves me. That's me. What about you? What do you use to set your expectations? And what I want to encourage you to do is don't fall into that expectation gap. Don't fall into that expectation gap by assigning promises to God that he never made about himself. Right? Set your expectations on God as he revealed himself to be. Otherwise, you will be disappointed. Set your expectations. Make the right ones. Create the ones that he's revealed in his word by truth. See, a lot of times when people give up on God in the gap, they're giving up on a God that they made up themselves. And they assign promises to him he never made about himself, and they're disappointed. I understand how natural that is to do. That's why you've got to expect it's going to happen and create the right expectations. So how do you respond to a season of drought? Expect it's going to happen. That's the first response. And create the right expectations so you don't send out roots in a bunch of different directions and try to rely on human strength and fall in that gap. Here's the second response to a season of heat and drought. And it's from the text. Here it is. Keep green leaves. And you might be like, what? That isn't, what? I mean, it was in the text, to be fair. That's what we're looking at. But you're like, what is that like? How does that actually matter to people, right? Keep green leaves. And then you're thinking about, we're talking about seasons of heat and drought. So green leaves in seasons of heat and drought, how is that possible? And what does that even mean? And you look at this and it's like, that sounds good. I'd like to be that in heat and drought. I'd like to look like that. I'd like my life to be presented like that. I'd like to have that kind of peace in the storm and in the trial. Yeah. But this is what I think. This is why I'm saying keep green leaves. This is my encouragement. Green leaves are evidence of unshakable faith. And here's what I think they are. See, people with green leaves, it's the outwards, right? People with green leaves, they are those who flourish in seasons of heat and drought. They don't wilt up. You ever met someone whose joy is not tied to their external circumstances? Don't we like being around those people? They're not bothered. They're not worried about so many things. They are not concerned or frustrated when things don't quite go their way. Things roll right off their back. They're calm on the outside and on the inside. See, I think I think when heat and drought happen, when they occur, I think what's so often easy is it's easy to retreat inward and become really self-focused, right? When heat and drought hurts, like, oh, we got to shelter up, we got to hold back, right? But people with green leaves, they love people well. They don't do that. They love people well. They express that. They're a joy to be around. And I'm just telling you, when you have green leaves in a season of heat and drought and people look at the circumstances of your life and they're thinking, this doesn't make sense, that guy shouldn't be reacting that way, this is very tough, it is a powerful witness. People stand up and take notice. That's what we want to be. That's a response to heat and drought. Recently I went to Washington State. I got to be part of a really neat wedding, and while I was there, my wife and I were there together, and while we were there, we took a hike through Larrabee State Park. And when we told our friends, people that were there, that we went to Larrabee State Park, a bunch of people were like, oh, I'm sorry, we're in a drought. It probably wasn't as nice as it normally is. Let me tell you what I saw walking through Larrabee State Park. So that's what we heard from a number of people. It's like, we're in a drought. I was like, you could have told me that. It's like, if you're in a drought, I cannot tell. I mean, my wife and I, we were talking about this. There are so many ferns. I felt like I was in the movie Jurassic Park. At any given moment, a velociraptor could have grabbed my wife. I would have run away because it's a dinosaur. But you're prepared for it. I'm just saying it was so green. A drought? I couldn't tell there was a drought. That's people with green leaves. In seasons of heat and drought, they're not just getting by, they are healthy and thriving. That's what I want to be. So the question is, if we're going to keep green leaves, how do we do that? How do we keep green leaves? And I think if we're going to keep green leaves, it's about drawing confidence from God. We have to draw confidence from God. And I think we're only able to do that by building up stores. Building up stores of things that we know are true about God that will sustain us in the seasons of drought. Because I think it's about stores. I think it's about being able to pull from something deep within us during that season of drought. So I didn't know much about desert plants. So here's what I learned about desert plants. I'll go with this image really quick. Desert plants it's actually all plants. This is what I learned. I Googled this. My wife is a scientist. I went to school for history. I tell stories and she deals in facts, right? So that's how that works. But plants have this thing called a vacuole. It's where they store water. And desert plants, they have an even bigger one in their cells. So interesting. But that's what they do. They store up water. And for the dry seasons, it's got to be stored up somewhere in order for the plant to live, the tree to live. So I want you to think pre-work, because this is what you want to do. If you want to keep green leaves, you got to build up those stores. And in this case, the stores are God's truth. So let me ask you this, and you think about this. Do you have stores of what you know to be true of God? Are there verses that come to mind? Are there principles that come to mind? Are there moments, are there examples of God's faithfulness in the Bible that you're like, you keep coming back to that, and no matter how hard things get, it's like, I remember you're that kind of God. I remember you're that kind of God. Or you've seen it in your life, and you've got these experiences. Later on when you hit this, you're like, I saw you faithful here, and I saw you faithful here, and I don't know about this, but I got to imagine. You're pulling from the stores. That's what you got to do. For me, one of the stores is a verse in Romans 8:15. And I remember when I was in college memorizing this, and it says this. It's the Apostle Paul says, we did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but we have received a spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba. That's another word for daddy, Father, God. So to me, I bank on that because it reminds me who I am. When I have those moments of trial and challenge where I'm questioning things, it reminds me who I am. It reminds me that I don't need to be afraid. And that's a store that I pull from. And so my question to you is, what are your stores? Do you have those? And now is the time to build them. Regardless of where you're at, build up stores. That's why when we talk about having a time and place, we're talking about, and you could look at that time and place, it's a devotional time. It's how you build a relationship with Jesus. It's about consistency. It's about building up those stores, because you've got to have the deep stores when the seasons of heat and drought show up so that you can keep green leaves. Otherwise, if you don't build up the stores, you just end up relying on human strength, and you end up stunted and twisted. You just end up like this. So I think about building up stores. It's not whether you feel like it or whether you don't, because in the moments that you could fall in the gap, you may not feel like it, but you've got to continue to do it. And this is also true. Building up stores is also when you feel great, because there are times you feel so good and you think like, I don't need to do this. I don't need to invest in this time. Things are going so well. But I'm just telling you, they won't always. Expect it's going to happen. Expect a season of drought's going to come. You've got to build up those stores. It's about consistency. At the Global Leadership Summit this year, there was a speaker named James Clear, and he was talking about the power of habits. And here's what he said, or he starts with a question. He says, what's the difference between eating a donut or a salad today? That question. And then he goes on to say, probably not much today. But over time, if you did that every day, I'd have to go to the gym far more frequently, right? But over time, it matters a lot. And here's what he says. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. They don't seem like much on any given day, but over the months and years, their effects can accumulate to an incredible degree. And then he said this super profound to me. Time will magnify whatever you feed it. That's the thing. Time will magnify whatever you feed it. Invest in a relationship. Feed it truths. Build up those stores for the season of drought. So keep green leaves by building up stores of God's truth, character, and faithfulness to sustain you in the dry seasons. Here's the third response I want to invite you to consider. Send roots deeper in heat and drought. Send roots deeper into the Lord in heat and drought. Here's what I mean, because like when heat and drought, I get easy to retreat, to protect, to go into protect mode. Don't do that. In fact, just send them deeper into God. That's what I want to invite you to do. And the question for a lot of people is like, okay, heat and drought are coming, but then the bigger question is, why does God allow seasons of heat and drought even in the first place? And this is what I think. Heat and drought are necessary to help you develop deeper roots in God. They are necessary to help you develop deeper roots in God. If we stay shallow, we end up like this tree. This is another tree. That's my wife in front of it. I've done that for perspective. She's about 5'4". That tree is huge. You can't climb over that thing. And you look at those roots, it's like they are sprawled and they are thick, but you know what they're not? That deep. That deep. And it's felled. Like shallow roots, you get uprooted. when heat and drought show up. It looks huge, but it's shallow and it's toppled. Now, we'll say this about trials and those seasons of heat and drought. God doesn't cause them, but he allows those trials so that our roots go deeper. That's what James, the brother of Jesus, said. Look what he said. In James 1, he says, consider it pure joy. Which case, some of you wish you'd maybe change the word on that one. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. That's the thing. God allows those trials so that the roots go deeper, so that you'll grow to maturity, that you're mature and complete. So don't wish it away. You need the trials in order to keep putting the roots down and become everything that God created you to become. That's really the case. I want you to think of, God, that this illustration makes sense. Anyone ever had a personal trainer or seen a personal trainer in action before? Nods of heads is good too. Yeah, personal trainers? Okay. I want you to think of this moment. Think of God in that almost kind of like a personal trainer type moment. When I went to the gym for the first time, they do a fitness assessment. They try to let you know where you are. And I remember that we got to the stretching component, and the guy's like, okay, go ahead and stretch. Show me what you got. And then about 20 seconds later, he's like, you can go ahead and start stretching anytime. I was like, buddy, I am stretching, right? And so then I saw him like on his chessboard, his plan. He's like coming up with a customizable plan, like work on stretching a lot, right? But because that's what personal trainers do. They make you do the things you don't want to do to become the people you want to become. That's the thing. God allows the trials because he wants you to put your roots into him deeper. And this is why I think God uses heat and drought to create that spiritual growth. If everything was at your arm's length, then you wouldn't need to develop a robust and deep root system. Those seasons of heat and drought, they drive you deeper in a relationship with him. That's what they do. And he does this. This is why, like, I see it as a loving father. Because what Jeremiah has set up in this whole series, right, is there's only two options: human strength or the Lord. Human strength or the Lord. One is cursing, the other is blessing. That's what he set up. And so what God knows, because he knows truth and reality as it is, he loves you, and he knows that if you don't run your roots deeper into him, you will go after human strength. And you'll get twisted up. You'll look like this. And he loves you too much to he loves you too much to have that go for you. He doesn't want that for you. So that's why he allows the trial, so that your roots go deeper. Our roots are always on the move. And when we feel like God disappoints us, it's really tempting to put him out in a bunch of different directions. But don't do that. Instead, send roots deeper in heat and drought. Deeper into God. One of the things I learned, like, the velvet mesquite's pretty common in the Sonoran Desert. And you look at them, they don't look like huge trees comparatively. This is what I learned about them. Do you know that their roots can go like 50 meters down? They have deep roots. That's why they're resilient. See, the deeper the roots in God, the deeper they go, the more unshakable your faith will become. So if you want to grow an unshakable faith, here they are again for you. These are the three responses in heat and drought, because it's coming. Here they are. One, expect it's going to happen. Expect heat and drought to show up, and create the right expectations so you don't send out roots in all the wrong directions towards human strength. Secondly, keep green leaves by building up stores of God's truth and his faithfulness and his character to sustain you during the dry seasons, the challenging seasons. And when those trials hit, those heat and drought hit, send roots deeper into the Lord. Not in other directions, but send them into him, because you know in the back of your mind, this is for my good and my growth. And if you'll do that, what you'll do is you'll draw your confidence from God, even in seasons of heat and drought. And that's the point. Heat and drought, they're going to grow you. Not a death knell. It's life. And draw your confidence from God, even in seasons of heat and drought. And some of you may be wondering, why should I do that? because it feels like God is the one who seems to be continually letting me down. I hear what you're saying. I see why you said it, but why should I? And then I just look to Jesus for that. And this is what Jesus says. In Matthew 5, Jesus says this. He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst." He says, blessed are those, right? You'll be glad you did if you hunger and thirst. And you're like, then you look at the tree that Jeremiah describes and it doesn't look thirsty. Heat and drought, but green leaves, it doesn't look thirsty. It's planted by the river. I don't get it. How could it be thirsty? And then Jesus finishes that, right? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. And this is what I think our hearts long for. Our hearts desire to be right with God. We want righteous. We want to be righteous. That's what righteousness means. It means we're right with God. We want to be right with God. But the reality is that we can never be on our own. And the only one who can make us right with God is Jesus through his payment for our sin on the cross. That's what he did. He made us right with the Father on the cross. And so what he's saying is, you hunger and thirst for righteousness. In other words, you're hungering and thirsting for him, because over and over in the story in the Gospels, Jesus said multiple times that he was the living water. Come to me, you'll no longer be thirsty. You'll be satisfied. That's what I'm trying to say. That heat and drought, he allows us to experience heat and drought, so we experience hunger and thirst and go after him harder. And I believe that you can trust Jesus during any season of heat and drought, because he thirsted so that you can be satisfied. That's what he said on the cross. He said, I thirst. He was thirsty so that you could be satisfied. And he paid for your sin. And he loves you. And he did that for you. And when we reflect and remember communion, which is what we're about to do, so get this if you've got it, and in a moment I'll pray, you can grab one from the back. When we remember communion and respond and receive it, that's what we're doing. We're remembering that he became thirsty so that I could be satisfied. And because of what he did for us on the cross, we have confidence in him. It's another example of his faithfulness for all time. You can trust him that he will not leave you. He will not forsake you. He gave his life for you because he loves you. And in this cup, what you see is the bread, which represents his body given for you, and the juice, which symbolizes his blood that was shed for you. He gave it for you. He thirsted so that you might become satisfied once and for all. So I'm going to pray. And then we're going to thank him for this together and receive this together. Jesus, thank you for how good you are. And when I think about these different responses, when I think about those seasons of heat and drought, I want to be who you want me to become. I want to be someone that's I want to be unshakable. I want to have those green leaves. I want things to roll off my back. I don't want to be worried. I don't want to be stressed. I don't want to be anxious. And I don't want to be so concerned about avoiding things in life that might not go my way, that I try to avoid all those things, and I'm just so racked with anxiety. I don't want that for myself. I want to depend on you and face whatever life has to throw at me, but with my roots deeply in you. And I believe that I can do that. I'm confident that I can do that because of your love for me. And because you not only gave your life on the cross, but on the third day you rose from the dead. And you have all power and authority. And you're the one that is helping me. And I can trust you. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you've done. And I pray this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen. As you're ready, take this and receive it. And thank him for it.